English translation, 70th contact, Thursday, 6th January 1977, 001 hours.
Today I have some questions that you have answered earlier. But we would all appreciate it if you could answer them again, in a coherent way, and if possible in more detail. It is about earthly humanity, a part of its history, and about the various gods that have functioned on or in connection with our world. Could you give me some more coherent information about this?
Sure, if that is what you want.
Naturally, but first I have another question. At the last contact I asked you a question about the giants, etc., and if I remember correctly you told me that Noah was 3 meters and 10 centimeters tall, right?
Sure, why do you ask?
Because of a clerical error I made. Instead of 3.1 meters, I said 31 meters.
That is not so bad, because you are able to rectify that.
This is what has just happened through your answer and my question. But now, something else, also a question. In the last contact report, I covered up the question and your answer, on advice. The question was how many atoms a molecule contained. Your answer was that the answer to this question, in this form, could lead to misunderstandings. But then you said that a molecule contained 49 atoms. Unfortunately, I could not find the questioner now, so I cannot refine the question for you and do not know what, in actual fact, to ask. Therefore, I would like to ask you now to give me an explanation for your answer, because in the meantime I have been told that the different molecules, of which I also do not know what they are, have different numbers of atoms. So, my question goes like this. What did you describe with your answer? Which molecule is it that contains 49 atoms?
I feared that, but I can give you the answer. The molecule I have mentioned is, according to your concept, the primary or first molecule of the materializing spirit mass or spirit energy. This molecule contains 49 atoms, of which only a few are known to earthly science. Fundamentally, it is to be explained here that the Earth scientists are on the wrong track in the designation of the atoms, because what they designate as under the atoms are not atoms. These themselves are from a certain level no longer of a purely material nature, but intermediaries between coarse matter and spirit energy. Everything is divided into a sevenness, which we call the sevenness of the matter structure. Structurally, the 7 levels are completely different, and thus also different in their value. So far, only 2 of these levels are known to Earth science, namely the 7th and the 6th, while they begin to explore the 5th, because they have somehow become aware of it. So the scientists of the Earth work completely correctly in their research, because they explore the origin of life by regression. This means that they trace their research from the end product back to the origin, which corresponds to sound reasoning. Despite their right actions in this respect, however, the Earth scientists are extremely arrogant and still very poorly educated, for how else would it be that they call the 7th level of matter structure an atom or atomic level, although this designation only applies to the 1st level, which is absolutely indivisible in its value. The 2nd level known to Earth science, which in reality represents the 6th level, you call elementary particle or elementary particle level, while the 5th level is already known to them, but they are not yet able to analyze it. So they know 2 levels of the matter structure, the 2 last 6th and 7th levels, while they try to fathom a 3rd level i.e., the 5th, which they will call quark or similar, but they have no idea that there are in total 7 levels, and they still lack the knowledge about the other 4. And since these facts are unknown to them, how are they to understand that besides the atomic level, there is also a micro-atomic plane which permeates through all spiritual, energetic, and coarse material matter?
Thanks for your information. I have understood only damn little of it, but the physicists may well cope with it.
As a rule, this will be beyond their comprehension.
You may be right. But now the other thing, where we are also interested in the history of the Aryans, if you know anything about it.
Sure, at which events should I start?
Start where the earliest ancestors were still in their original home. Name the time when they first came to Earth, etc.
As you wish. So, at the beginning of our contacts, I have already mentioned in detail the history of the destruction and reconstruction of the original home worlds.
Excuse me, you mean the destruction of worlds, etc. by the Destroyer? Where was that actually?
Sure, that is what I am talking about. The later original homeworlds were planets in the constellation known to you as Lyra and near Vega in a different space-time structure, which is shifted from yours by a fraction of a second. Few of the worlds there are still inhabited today by different races, all belonging to our wide alliance. Our early ancestors had mastered space travel for more than 22 million years, carried out expeditions and exploratory flights reaching far into space, and came to Earth for the first time. However, the Earth, was still deep in the late primordial development and was therefore left to time for the further development. Nonetheless, Earth was often revisited to release criminal elements, humans that were detrimental on the home worlds. Only a few millennia, however, did this last, and then, for reasons unknown to us, they relinquished the Earth and left this world alone for many millions of years, during which life of all kinds, already developed on Earth, could continue to develop in a natural sense, except that at later times the abandoned life forms mixed with human-like life forms already on Earth, which happened for the first time a few million years ago. Millions of years went by as the primeval races spread far into space, also developed themselves in a consciousness-based manner and acquired great powers. But not yet mastering control of these, they were used to doing evil things and became evil for many worlds. During the primeval catastrophes caused by the Destroyer, 2/3 of humankind were destroyed on the very early original homeworlds in another level of the universe. Through hardship and privation, however, they soon found a new beginning, so they were able to build a new civilization and culture in less than 9 centuries. By working and researching together, they created a very great technology, which reached further than anything they had ever seen before. At the same time, they also developed their consciousness, the powers of which they were not yet able to control. So the time came when they built themselves flying ships, with which they could also leave their space-time structure and could rush through the free and wide space of the levels of the universe. These were flying apparatuses of disc-like form and with beam drives. With these devices, they flew out into the vastness of the universe to other solar systems and planets, which they had expeditions to and colonized, either peacefully or through murderous wars. Often with evil violence, they created new life possibilities and new living space for themselves because they needed it due to the proliferation of the human beings of their peoples. It was especially the scientists who searched space for ever new worlds and solar systems, and it was no problem for them because their ships were equipped with all technological possibilities which made them absolute rulers. Their weapons were of immense power and prowess, so battles with whole peoples of foreign worlds were only very short and one-sided in favor of the conquerors. In particular, the scientists recognized, in the course of time, the unlimited possibilities of their consciousness-based powers, so they pushed and expanded them by immense accumulations of knowledge until they became a matter of course for them, and they swung themselves even higher up, whereby they soon became absolutely dominant over their peoples. According to their great knowledge, they were called Shwish-Ish-Wish, which is synonymous with the name God, which is familiar to you and which means King of Wisdom. The Jeshwish, far superior to all people in terms of knowledge and ability, subjugated all life forms, cast a spell over them, and ruled them in a dictatorial form. For several centuries, exactly after 864 years of today's terrestrial era, the people rose up in a revolution that at first smoldered underground, but this led to the Jeshwish taking violent measures and trying to nip everything in the bud, which did not succeed completely. The Domineers killed innumerable human beings or simply eliminated them completely with their terrible weapons so that not a single speck of dust remained. This, however, increased the anger of the people, and underground they were secretly preparing for battle. Preparations took 4 long centuries in secret form to break out in one sudden blow into a far-reaching and open war of liberation, which spread and dragged on over many other dimensioned worlds of the Lyra and Vega systems. More than 60% of all things of cultural value were destroyed and completely demolished. Some races were completely wiped out, while others were only able to survive with extreme hardship. 3 worlds of the Lyra systems were simply completely eliminated and dissolved into energy by a novel process that is now also under development on the Earth in its very beginnings. Earth humans already call this insane weapon according to its deadly value, namely overkill. Still, as a fantasy product of a perfect technology, this weapon of total elimination, which is in research and construction by scientists, has already found entrance into various books and films describing this cruelest of all weapons in futuristic novels to save Earth humans from the last madness. According to the terrestrial calendar, the event of the outbreak of the War of Liberation in the Lyra and Vega systems dates back some 230,000 years. The commander-in-chief of the terrorizing forces was an Jeshwish called Asael, who, after realizing the hopelessness of the struggle, escaped the vengeful and victorious peoples by a quick escape into the space-time structure of this level of the universe. Secretly, he managed to seize a powerful fleet of 183 large ships and 250 space reconnaissance ships, with a total crew of 360,000 human beings, and to escape under the most severe combat actions. They quickly left the home systems, only to wander through the again-shifted space-time structures for many restless years, before one day they found a large star system which offered them the necessary possibilities for life, far away from their original home systems. The new star system encompassed 3,000 light-years and 254 partly still young and therefore blue-shining suns, which partly, however, already had their own planetary systems with only a few habitable planets. The whole star system was named after the leader of the escape fleet, namely according to your word value Asael's system. After taking possession of this young star system, where various planets had been made habitable by the Titanic fugitives over the course of 300 years, and a new humanity had been created, they set out again in larger groups to explore space and develop new habitats. Of the 3 worlds made habitable, various expedition ships were equipped, after which the Titan fugitives flew out into the vastness of space to reach and take possession of their predetermined destination after 17 years. These were stars and planets in their dimension beyond those stars known to you as Hesperides, which have their own worlds circling around them and were only weakly inhabited by human life forms, which were subjugated by the conquerors. During 2 centuries, a new culture was created on these differently dimensioned Hesperid worlds and inhabited by emigrants from the Asael system. Another 70 years later, Asael walked the path of all transients. He died. He was succeeded by his daughter Plearia and Jeshrish, female queen of knowledge goddess, and consequently the home system, the Asael system, was also renamed the Plearia system, because for the human beings of that time who were Titans, symbolization was still very much in force, as it still is today with the human beings of the earth, which corresponds to a perverse illogicity. Under the supreme command of the new leader, Playahria, further expeditions were prepared to expedite a very distant and lonely solar system, located in this, your space-time plane, which according to all calculations must have come into possession of a section of a planet from the original earliest home systems, after the destroyer had destroyed the earliest original homeworlds many millions of years ago. According to the calculations, however, the destroyer itself must also have taken the same orbit, thus it had been changed in its orbit by the sun of the distant system and had been introduced into the system in a recurring orbit. These calculations were like a hint for the Titans, which is why they set off for the distant system, not knowing that their ancestors had already flown to this system and abandoned undesirable elements on a world millions of years before, namely, on the Earth, your home world. So the expedition ships set off again, and after many years reached the Sol system, where they forced 3 different planets under their rule and began to build a new culture. However, these planets, Earth, Malona, and Mars, were still extremely inhospitable and hostile to life, so the majority of the expedition fleet left the worlds again after a few years, leaving only a few behind, who slowly faded away and joined the animal-looking feral descendants of those earlier abandoned ones millions of years ago, as well as the pure Earth-born ones. The scientists of the Playahria system, like their earliest ancestors, left the Earth to its natural development, making expeditions and monitoring visits only here and there, and then leaving the human beings who had become completely wild and were now left there to their hard fate. This lasted many thousands of years. Then, when the idolism had been abolished in the Playahria systems and the leader Playahria had died, a new intelligence developed on the Earth through the descendants of the feral abandoned ones, which led to the fact that the Playahria system inhabitants, who were constantly observing the Earth, came forward with new expeditions to Earth and once again built up a culture in the same manner as they built up a culture on the 4th planet, namely on the world of Malona. Still very barbarically inclined, however, power struggles broke out again among the new settlers after less than 300 years, which led to the fact that the Earth had to be vacated by an order under force from the home systems. Malona, on the other hand, remained inhabited because the population there remained peaceful. But this only lasted for barely 40 years, and then the greed for power among the 2 different peoples also took hold there, and before any orders could be made from the home systems, the Malonians destroyed each other and destroyed the whole planet. Since then, the debris of the once beautiful planet between Mars and Jupiter has been orbiting the Sol, the system's sun, as a long-lasting memorial to human madness. From the home worlds, the development of the Earth has been constantly monitored, and expeditions have been sent to it year after year. Again and again attempts were also made to repopulate this very beautiful world, but these failed miserably time and again over the course of more than 800 years. All kinds of life forms were deported to Earth, also those you would call prisoners, to simply abandon them there and leave them to their fate. Robbed of all technology, it was inevitable that they would wither and become overgrown, mixed again with the overgrown descendants of earlier elements, and with Earth humans, and became bestial. But then the time finally came when the great enterprise was finally taken up. With several hundred large and small spaceships, the Earth was once again approached and seized. A great culture was built up, which lasted for 600 years before the greed for power among the highly ambitious scientists increased again and led to new terrible acts of war, whereby once again everything was destroyed to the last. The Earth reverted to its old existence, where life forms continued to exist, but quickly became wild. For 400 years the Earth was completely unnoticed and left to its own devices before it was approached again. This time, however, It was no longer an attempt at an expedition, but once again an escape. On the homeworlds in the Pleiades star systems, power struggles broke out once again between the ascending scientists and the peoples, who were enslaved by their terrible weapons and other means. But, while on all three homeworlds the vicious battles of annihilation raged, a large group of dissident scientists came together under the leadership of a certain Pelagon, who already had the status of an Ishvish. Under his leadership, 70,000 human beings were gathered, including many scientists who seized various spaceships and fled the Pleiaria planets. According to the coordinates of old records, the refugees entered this space-time structure and the Sol system, and thus once again arrived on Earth, where the Titans once again settled. According to earthly time calculation, this was about 190,000 years ago. On the home planets, the vicious war was fought to the bitter end, and the scientists were put in their place. The form of government was abolished and placed in the hands of spiritual leaders who proclaimed anew the long-forgotten spiritual teaching and taught the peoples. These recognized the value of the teaching, took it to their own hands, and henceforth lived according to it, after which they found final peace some 50,000 years ago, and henceforth lived according to the law and recommendation of absolute creational determination, which has been preserved until today and will never change again. In the course of the next 8,000 years, the Pleiaran peoples, as they were referred to from then on, developed to a very high spiritual and consciousness-based level. Consequently, they allied themselves with all kinds of foreign and their own peoples in near and far systems and lived now only in the harmonious evolution. Thus they developed together into a great alliance, in the course of which they carried out new expeditions and, 51,951 years ago, found in the galaxy of Andromeda a half-spirit world inhabited by half-spirit beings, an already extremely highly developed life form, which existed and exists only half-materially, but therefore already half-spiritually. In best agreement with these life forms, everything was resolved that they should in future guide the destinies of their peoples and their great covenant with their gigantic knowledge and wisdom, which was joyfully welcomed by all peoples. Consequently, in agreement with the spiritual leaders, who were human life forms and spiritual teachers, it was decided that all destinies of the future should be guided by these half-spiritual forms which had become best friends. The form of guidance should be that of a counsel from a higher spiritual level, which is why this guidance and advice was referred to as the High Council, which has survived to this day and will never change again. Since then, all folks of all races connected to us have been under the guidance of the High Council, which never gives any orders, but only a High Council, which is optional for each individual form of life to follow, and which as a rule is also followed without exception. Those who fled to the earth knew nothing of the end of the wars for the time being. In the joy of their newly won freedom, they gladly submitted to the tight regime of Pelagon, who had chosen 200 scientists as sub-leaders and deployed them according to their fields of knowledge. Under their leadership emerged large cities with other inhabited areas, and a very high culture developed on all the continents of the Earth, which had resulted from continental shifts over about 300 million years. For about 10,000 years harmony and peace reigned, but then again an Jeshwish called Jesas came out, who murdered Pelagon's successor and seized power over all the, by then, united different folks and races. 20 years later, however, the folk rose up against Jeza, and a terrible and worldwide war broke out again over the earth by those who had traveled farther. Many hundreds of thousands fled with large and small ships into free space, set down and settled in another space-time structure in Beta Centaurus, which you know in your space-time structure as the Barnard Star. A few million humans remained on the Earth, where everything that had been built by the extraterrestrial humans had been completely destroyed and totally eliminated. Those left behind, deprived of all technical and other cultural possibilities by the complete total destruction, gradually fell into a wicked lethargy, atrophied, and became wild beings in a nasty barbarism. For 700 years, the Earth was simply avoided before the descendants of the fugitives set out again to populate the beautiful blue world again. This was 133,000 Earth years ago, according to your current chronology. The returnees were led by Njeshwish with the name Atlant, married to Njeshrish, named Caryatide. In the latest episode, under the leadership of Atlant, the continent of Atlantis, which had been headed for again and again, and used for millennia, was expanded and made habitable, while under the command of his wife Caryatide, Lesser Atlantis came into existence, as at the same time her cousin Muras built the gigantic city of Mu, which, like Atlantis, also found its origin in very early times. The reason for the construction of these cities so far apart was that the humans had become cleverer through all the wars and hoped for peace as a result of the great distance between the cities if everyone stayed in their domains. So it went well for many long years, a whole 1,800 years to be precise. Then, however, again, some scientists exalted themselves, whipped up by lust for might, and tried to snatch up control for themselves. This time, however, they had not reckoned on the people's memory of war, which had been passed down over the ages. So before the scientists could strike, the folk rose up against them. Through an accomplice, the scientists obtained possession of spaceships and fled into the space-time shifted regions of Beta Centauri. This was 115,000 Earth years ago. After 2,000 years, during which the malicious refugees again created a high technological standard and produced many descendants, they returned filled with hate to the Earth, after they had increased their hate immeasurably against the extraterrestrial inhabitants of the Earth and were only able to preserve order within their own ranks with terrible punishments. Spurred on through their inhuman hate, they, through research and the knowledge obtained from it, drove up their life expectancy to more than 1,000 years. Their single wish was, however, to gain control over the Earth, for which reason every individual was taught wicked intrigues and was instructed in the craft of war. After 2,000 years, this hate-drenched people was so far along that it could venture an attack on the Earth. Therefore it manned its ships and came newly to the Earth, and indeed under the leadership of the Jeshvish Arus, the barbarian. This happened 113,000 years ago. Arus was extremely bestial and barbarous in his disposition, and his power was feared. Like Pelagon, already thousands of years before, Eris also had 200 high-level scientists with him, who he made sub-leaders. In a lightning action, they fell upon the Earth, robbing, murdering, and taking possession of the land. Primarily, they conquered the distant land in the northern regions, where the climate was moderate and very good. These were those regions, which are traditionally known to you as Hyperborea, and which were far in the north, before an upset of the Earth shifted its axis, so that the then regions exist today where you name Florida. Coming from the north, Aris's son, Aris II, set out and fell upon those lands which today you call India, Pakistan and Persia, and so forth, whereby they struck the earliest forefathers of the Sumerians, who, peace-loving, fled and set down far in the south, folk of dark-colored skin, but by your terms, not Negroid, but like Europeans and of tall growth, risen from a race of former Syrian refugees who had likewise settled on the earth 133,000 years ago, as did the refugees from the Playaran system. Named after Aris II, the India of today was at that time called Aryan, which, however, split off from Hyperborea after a few centuries, after 210 years, to be exact, and joined with the inhabitants of Mu and Agharta, while from Hyperborea, Aris I constantly troubled Mu and Greater Atlantis by wicked war activities in order to become their ruler. During around half a millennia, or said very precisely, during 502 years, those war machinations continued until Aris I, who in the meanwhile had become old and weak, succeeded in infiltrating wicked elements of his hater humans into the leading controlling ranks of Atlantis and Mu, who secretly stirred up violence and hate for so long, as also did their descendants over several centuries, until, through boundless intrigues, Mu and Atlantis were able to be completely destroyed some centuries later, while the only few survivors were beaten into servitude. However, great scientists, in knowledge of the coming things and conscious of their powerlessness, set off in spaceships and fled towards the early homeworlds in the Playaran systems, where they were affably received. I indeed do not need to speak yet again about the destruction of Atlantis and Mu, because you will find that as a separate chronicle in the explanations given to you. So it only remains for me to report that Aris XI, as a very distant descendant of Aris I, was murdered in his old age many thousands of years later, and around 100,000 years after the destruction of Mu and Atlantis, by his third-born son Jehavan, after which this one took over command of the Hater people in order to rule these and 3 earthly peoples and the Hyperboreans himself. The one Earth folk consisted of the very distant descendants of the Armus folks who had lived where the region of Armenia is today. These were descendants of the Jeshvish Armus, who settled there with his race 133,000 years ago after he had emigrated from the Playaran systems. The second Earth folk which fell under Jehavan's control were the descendants of the Aryans, who meanwhile had mingled themselves with the still very underdeveloped pure earthly and lethargic native population after the Sumerians were expelled. The third Earth humans were not really such a people in themselves, because they were a very widely disseminated alliance of gypsies, which was interspersed with Jehavan's spies and saboteurs, who, in unity with the gypsies, brought about dissension everywhere, greedily drawing everything to themselves, and were always constantly eager to murder, burn and rob, for which reason one named them the Hebrons by the original language of our forefathers, therefore Hebraion, and later then Hebrons. These names correspond to gypsy, scum and outcast in the sense of the original language, which therefore has not been transferred to your present languages, because the sense of your present term for gypsy still only means the wanderers, the itinerant, and the unsettled ones. Thereby it should be clarified that the present gypsy people have not the least in common with the Hebraian of that time, who proclaimed themselves the firstborn and the chosen ones, just as much as do their distant descendants, who today still dare to assert this. In truth, the Hebraians were the real scum and outcasts of Earth humanity, because through them fights and quarrels within the whole world were constantly stirred up and yet further spread, which has been maintained until the present day. Earth will only finally be at peace, then, when this power-hungry and bloodthirsty Hebraian alliance, which has declared themselves as a people, and which has split into various sects addicted to world control and so forth, has been fully dissolved. Jehavan ruled until about 3,660 Earth years ago, until he was likewise treacherously murdered by his only son Jehav, who then snatched up rule for himself after 340 years of his father's reign. Jehav ruled wickedly and always screamed for blood and revenge, until 3,320 years ago in your chronology, during which time he sired 3 sons who were named Arisum, Ptah, and Salam. Megalomaniacal like his father Jehavan, he let himself be proclaimed as creator, and celebrated as such, and like his father, he caused terrible devastation among the 3 human races, and he demanded blood and death. As addicted to power as his father Jehav was also his firstborn son Arusam, who constantly wanted to take over his father's power. Thus he also finally murdered his father Jehav and wanted to snatch up the power for himself. But he failed profoundly, because his younger brother Ptah and his youngest brother Salam positioned themselves against him in order to expel and ban him into exile, because having become disgusted by the constant wars, power struggles, and bloodshed, Ptah and Salam already made an effort themselves for many decades to lead humane forms of life. Therefore, already for a long time, they assembled around themselves many like-minded ones, with whose help they gained control of Arusam and his 72,000 followers and expelled them. But Arusam secretly returned to the earth and settled down with his army in the land of Egypt, in the old cubicle constructions which had existed there unused for more than 70,000 years. Deep in the interior of the earth and deep below the pyramids, they established themselves securely, whereby they converted the rooms and buildings deep below the present pyramids of Giza as a center for their wicked purposes, from where they and their descendants since then tried to realize their tyrannical plans, but as of now without noteworthy success, although their way of obtaining the goal of deceit, lying, and intrigues was through false teachings and the leading astray of the uncorrupted earth humans through religious teachings of madness and cults, and many kinds of other evil machinations. Due to their expulsion they, however, forfeited very much, because all possibilities for technological and otherwise scientific further development was prevented for them, as also, however, was all their research, and so forth, which thereby led to the quite rapid reduction in their life expectancy, and today still only amounts to an average of 94 years, which in relation to today's people converts to practically only about 20 years higher than the average in European regions. This means for the renegades, called the Giza intelligences by us, that they are slowly dying out, and today are still only fewer than 2,100 in number. Due to complete isolation from outer space, these remaining ones will also be no more in fewer than 3 decades, because they are all already old and no longer capable of procreation. But in spite of that, they still maliciously hold firm to their tyrannical plans, and they do not see themselves as beaten. Arusam ruled until about 3,010 years before your time reckoning began, 310 BCE, until a powerful forced departure was secured for him by a mutineer by the name of Hen, who was called Jehovah in the tongue of the Hebraeans, and likewise also gradually within his own ranks, whereas the appellation the Cruel One was added. In the year 2080 BCE, already old and weak, he was displaced, and his nephew Kamagol I took over the evil command of the Giza intelligences in order to expand the headquarters below the surface of the Pyramid of Giza to a murderous center of power, which allowed no possibility at all of being destroyed anymore. Like no ruler before, Kamagol I forced all earthly religions under his control and created terrible cults which demanded human blood, which were able to be partially maintained until the present. All efforts from outside were in vain, as his position of power could not be broken. But also Kamagol I was only a human, so one day he met his own fate from out of his own ranks, in the form of his own son, Kamagol II, who overthrew him and deprived him of power, and let him die miserably in a deep dungeon. Kamagol II was in many things even more malicious than his father, which he soon revealed, after taking over power, through the introduction of monstrous mass murdering of earth-born terrestrial human beings, who he slapped under his religious power through many kinds of means. As one of the last really extremely long-lived, Kamagol II attained a great age and died a natural death just a few days ago, which we were able to ascertain just 2 days ago. He departed this world on the 27th of December 1976, therefore around 10 days ago. The still remaining Giza intelligences, already old and weak in many cases but still filled with hate and tyrannical plans, do not give up. But indeed their days are numbered, so in 3 decades at the latest they will be no more. With the Heaven Sons, the Hyperboreans, and the emigrants from the Pleiaran system, Ptah and Salam, the sons of the murdered Jehav, led the further rule by common agreement. They governed well and created peace, and only occasionally mixed in the affairs of the earth-born earth-humans. After his 93rd year of government, Ptah was stricken by a malicious and unknown disease, from which he succumbed a few days later. Consequently, his brother Salam continued to lead the government alone, until, weak from his great age, he handed over command to his son Pleios 2040 Earth years ago, after he had taken up connections to the home worlds already centuries before, and had placed himself and his people under the home form of government, namely that of the spiritual teachers. His son Pleios was, like his father, a very wise and a kind governor, and as of 1,299 years ago of earthly chronology, the homeworlds, after an interruption of around 240 years, newly positioned themselves under the guidance of the High Council. He too arranged himself and his people therein. Respecting and following the advice of the High Council, he prepared for the long-yearned-for return to the homeworlds, which took place 1,094 years ago by your chronology, after Emmanuel, at Pleios' direction, begat by the spiritual leader Gabriel, was educated as a prophet and had become right for his mission. Still to mention is that among the very distant descendants of Eris, who had subjugated the lands in the north, there existed elements in great number, who, until in the time of Jehav, preserved themselves as the Erusists. These, a group of 160,000 humans, were named the Great Aryans because they still advocated the ideas of Eris I. They even released themselves from the powerful control of Jehav and wandered, plundering, through the land, from northwest to the east, where they penetrated into that land where in earlier times Eris II had settled with his people and expelled the Sumerians, where in the meantime, however, the then Aryans mixed themselves with the low native population and forgot their actual origin. Also in the meantime, the descendants of the Sumerians returned to their old homeland, so also they settled there again. But then came the Great Aryans, who moved between the Caspian Sea and Ararat, and took possession of the clay-brick towns of the mixed folks, which had reached a good level of prosperity as a result of the earlier invading Aryans and the returning descendants of the Sumerians. Their work consisted mainly of trade and agriculture, which was well mastered by the Sumerian descendants. So, the appearance of the human beings and all their buildings was very orderly, and a strict discipline ruled. Indeed, even a certain submissiveness towards the highly developed Sumerian descendants, who were superior to the native people in consciousness-based development and worldliness. And exactly this world was attacked and forced into bondage and transformed and pressed into a new state structure by the Aryans, who, deprived of all technology, had been wandering for long years, coming from the far north. Deprived of all technology by Jehav's Myrmidons, the Aryans settled down in the distant lands, but in time became stunted and mixed with the natives, so soon all knowledge and ability of a higher level and of their origin disappeared into the darkness of forgetfulness.
Fantastic, I am as flat as a flounder. However, what is the name of the new superior twerp among the Giza wretches?
According to our information, no new ruler will emerge. In future, all decisions are to be taken by joint council.
Also good. Then the knuckleheads among themselves will soon get into a fight and exterminate each other.
Sure, this could be partly true.
Ha! Good. But now 2 more questions, or 3, regarding our and your Pleiades. So this name comes from an Yeshrish. Was it simply retained later on Earth, or was this group of stars referred to differently here?
The name was retained, but lost itself in the confusion of languages that appeared on Earth, and then, over time, returned to its original value, mainly due to mythologies.
These are probably the ancient Greek as well, right?
Sure, but there are also others, as you mentioned through the main one.
Well, then I would like to know what form of time calculation you use, at least on era. Do you also calculate in years like we do?
Of course, because they are originally from our ancestors, so they are also given on the Earth.
Aha, and since when do you calculate? I mean, since when did your time calculation begin?
Since the beginning of peace on our home systems, so about 50,000 years ago.
Aha, can you give me the exact date?
Sure. Today we count the year 51,711 because there was once a break, but it was not due to war but of reconstructive importance.
Good. And now the question of how Era got its name and when.
This is very simple. The Pleiades stars of your space-time plane are much younger than the Earth, but not so with our stars and planets, which were named only by numerical values until the time when the High Council took control. Since then, however, at the request of the High Council, our homeworlds have been called by melodious names, for example also Era, while the celestial systems are called Pleiadian, or in our case, Pleiaren.
If I think correctly, this should have happened 51,151 years ago, right?
Sure, you think correctly. But I would also like to explain to you that at this point in time, the new era was also introduced. So we have two of them, the year 51,111, which reminds us of the final peacetime, and the year 51,051, which reveals the spiritual alignment with the High Council.
I understand that, also if it sounds a bit silly, but I really can understand it. I find the justification for your reckoning of time much better and also much more valuable than the earthly ones, which confront stupid, alleged creators and other knuckleheads. But now something else. Can you tell me some things for the year 1977 about coming events and about some things you have in mind? You have told me some things before in confidence, but surely there are still some things that everyone else may also know, right?
Sure, I can explain some of them. What do you want to know?
What is going on with the earthquakes and other natural disasters, etc., whether you are giving a demonstration after all, in spite of everything, and whether there are any things happening regarding unknown flying objects?
Some of this I can explain officially.
Well, it would also be interesting to know how many dead and wounded there were in the earthquakes in China. Officially, only unclear and rather lying statements are made. The prophecies of Patih Li, which were passed on to me, spoke of about 1 million dead.
That is of correctness. Our investigations have shown that 893,000 human beings were killed by the earthquakes in China. 208,000 human beings will be permanently and seriously damaged by injuries for life, while a further 801,000 human beings will be minorly or seriously injured. The number of missing and still unrecovered people, most of whom are buried deep under rubble, is around 70,000. But now I would like to answer the other questions, which, however, also goes beyond the year 1977. The Earth will not come to rest, because many more major quakes will shake the Earth in the future, much more than has been the case in recent years. Except that these quakes are not all expected this year but are expected to continue into the future. However, they will be of such terrible violence that countries and islands will sink or rise by inches. Unusually severe droughts will also sweep across the world in the future, only to be followed by avalanche disasters and floods of unusually large proportions, with Europe also affected in all respects. Air transportation will suffer heavy, even very heavy, losses due to terror and technical and human failure and with many deaths. Also, many events will affect the water navigation. Violence and crime, as well as racial hatred and neo-Nazism and extreme right-wing and left-wing extremism, will rise to dizzying heights everywhere, and sectarian violent causes of death will become rampant among the human beings of all races. It will all be much worse than ever before.
Okay, that is enough, but what is the basis of your data?
These are probability calculations and forecasts.
Well, what about a demonstration, etc.?
That is still outstanding and has been promised to you. The time should be spring or summer, maybe also autumn. Elsewhere, however, not from our side, the Earth humans will be in for some surprises when certain things appear through races foreign to Earth, as I have already predicted to you with confidence and only for you alone. I am not allowed to explain more about it because everything is not yet definitively certain.
It is all right. I do not want to push you. One thing is not quite clear to me, though. You told me recently that an Earth-foreign spaceship has been roaming the Earth space for months, seeking contact with Earth humans, but that it does not dare to do so. Where does this ship come from, and why do you not make contact with it?
It is very strange with this, because with all possible means we have tried to contact them uselessly so far, and when we appear, the ships flee.
Why now all of a sudden?
Because there are several of them, as we have now discovered. All of them are of a white radiating or green radiating color, often with a strange red-orange tail behind them, containing substances unknown and alien to us, which are currently being analyzed by our scientists. With regard to these objects, our probability calculations still reveal some indefinable surprises.
This is very interesting, but now listen. You called me very far away today. After all, it is 21 kilometers from Hinwil to here. Could you not fly me back a bit for that? Maybe to just before Hinwil?
Sure. What happens to your companions Jacobus and his father?
You know, I want to have some fun. I have the radio, and with it I can call them and direct them to Wetzikon, about 20 kilometers from where they dropped me off. If you then let me float down in the open field, leaving a single footprint in the untouched snow towards the road, but without one leading into the field, then the fun is perfect.
Suit yourself.
Okay, then just one more question while we are rushing off. Could you not just once say a greeting over the radio for all our friends? That should be possible, right?
I will think about it, but I think that I have to take responsibility for it, so maybe I will only do it on occasion, but that does not mean that it should be repeated all the time and that I am communicating.
Of course not. Ah, there is already Wetzikon down there. Nobody spoke about that either. You can drop me off in Winkelried back there in that snow-covered meadow. Good, yes there. Can I get out?
Sure. Farewell and be careful, for much is not good for you at the moment.
Do not worry, I know how to help myself. Take care, girl, bye.
Billy's footprints leading to the nearby road in the middle of the open field where Simyase had dropped him off the previous night. Photo taken on 7.1. 9 at 9, Tanners of Billy. Close-up of the place where Simyase had dropped Billy off the previous night. Photo taken on 7.1. 967 940 Billy.